Welcome to Coffee with Kish. Oh, yeah. So, starting off today's episode of Coffee with Kish, where I geek out about Mormonism, to thank everyone who's watched my videos so far. I've had a blast making them, and I look forward to keeping this up for a long time yet. I'm hoping I can keep this up regularly. It may be a little bit difficult to do so. I'm very busy at work. I've got a lot of publications I'm working on in my actual disciplinary area as an academic, and I really love doing that, but I would hate for this to fall by the wayside or between the cracks or whatever you want to say. I wanted to say something about geeking out about Mormonism and why I do it and why I think it's so compelling. So, I told you the story in my episode about Nibley that the first time I encountered his work was as a teenager, probably about a year or more before I left on a mission. I found the book Since Cumorah. That's the right title, not One Eternal Round, as I think I accidentally said in that episode. But Since Cumorah was the book. It belonged to my father. My father had been very interested in Hugh Nibley during his time in college back in the 60s, because, yes, Hugh Nibley was that old. So my dad's generation was interested in Hugh Nibley's work. I was interested in his work. And I think, there was always that part of my family's makeup that I think, at least on the edges, was just interested in weird esoteric stuff. I think, my dad is actually a scientist by training himself, so he actually doesn't really generally go in for the supernatural and all that kind of thing. But still, I think he finds esoteric stuff sort of groovy, and that's why when I was a kid, we would regularly tour the Masonic Temple in Alexandria, Virginia, Lodge Number 1, and see all of the cool Masonic relics there that were Egyptianizing, as a lot of Masonic architecture in the past was. And I think I was primed both inside my church experience and also in the sort of cultural interests my family had to be pretty accepting of this aspect of the LDS Church. I don't think everybody equally is, though. I think a lot of what bothers some people about the LDS Church, when they get past the sort of regular Christian aspect of it to dig into it a little bit deeper and into some of its cultural roots, they find it kind of troubling because they think, oh, this is like the occult or superstition, et cetera, et cetera. And so they don't really key into what's going on with the cultural background of the LDS Church. At least that would be my argument. Now, I have taken steps outside of this YouTube channel to try to correct that. I haven't done enough work in this area. There's a whole lot of work to do. But that work that I'm referring to is a scholarship on Mormonism's relationship to a new area of study in academia, part of the humanities, part of the study of the historical culture of the West and its evolution. I'm talking about Western esotericism. It's a big mouthful. Yeah, so what is Western esotericism? So Western esotericism isn't, I would say, unrelated to the occult, but the term occult is fraught. It usually, in modern parlance, relates to something that's illicit, secret, but also something that might be, in Christian terms, demonic or satanic. So the occult is too charged a term to use, and of course, some critics of Mormonism have talked about its roots in the occult, in Joseph Smith's magic practices, with all of the baggage that tends to carry in modern discussions of religion. Well, things weren't always that way, and magic wasn't always consigned to uh, the operations of uh, the little red chappie, the guy with the pitchfork, and the forked tail, Satan. It wasn't always just the province of Satan. Instead, magic has very deep roots in European history, going back to antiquity. And Western esotericism is, I would say, a continuing engagement of thinkers and you might say cultural influencers in the West through its history, through medieval times, but really ramping up in the Renaissance with the kind of higher secret knowledge and higher magic that was part of the elite culture of the Roman Empire, and even going back into the Empire of Alexander the Great. So, in antiquity, people with means were interested in gaining power through an understanding of nature, through the practice of magic, through knowledge of divining, like astrology or other forms of divination. And they put all this knowledge together with philosophy to really adopt a sort of higher spiritual way of life. It wasn't just spiritual, but involved a lot of spiritual aspects. And I'm especially thinking here of Neoplatonism. So, believe it or not, the philosophy of Plato made a big impact on the West. It wasn't just about Plato and his lifetime and the things that he wrote, but Plato in many ways stands at the root of all Western philosophy. And his works were revisited generation after generation, not just for what they taught people about how to define what the good was, how to govern, like I'm talking about the concept of the philosopher king, but also to get into the deep hidden aspects of the world and to find a way to tap into those hidden powerful aspects of existence. So, in a way, you could also say that Plato was very interested in religion. Unfortunately, as time has gone on, that association of Plato with things spiritual and things religious kind of evaporated. And it did so with, pressure from both Christians, but also Enlightenment thinkers. Both sides, the Christian religious side of the West and the growing Enlightenment to secular movements, didn't really want to deal with parts of the legacy of Plato that they just were embarrassing and they didn't really know what to do with. And it's only in recent times that scholars have really taken up the study of those aspects of Plato's legacy. That includes Joseph Smith. Joseph Smith was interested in the kinds of esoteric things that people who were interested in the spiritual side of Plato in the past were also interested in. I'm talking about like the great sort of wizardy guys of the Renaissance, for example, and Marsilio Ficino and others. Now, if you go back and read their stuff, also, by the way, John Dee in England, John Dee and Edward Kelly, people of the Renaissance and early modern periods, at least some of them, were deeply interested in the pagan past. Not because they necessarily wanted to be pagans themselves, but because they felt like there was some wisdom there that was lost. And so they're picking up on this idea that there's hidden wisdom out there, hidden spiritual wisdom, and that certain great philosophers and thinkers knew this wisdom, but that it's lost today. Now, is this sounding familiar to you? Because I think this is also related to the idea of the restoration. Now, I understand that principally the restoration is about the recovery of hidden or lost elements of Christianity, a return of the pure gospel. But as Stephen Fleming is arguing, that stuff that was Joseph Smith felt was the missing or higher esoteric information that had been lost from Christianity was probably something he was seeing in accessible writings about the Platonic legacy, the legacy of Plato, the esoteric, religious, spiritual legacy of the philosopher Plato, type of stuff. But where does the rubber meet the road here, and why might this be interesting to you? Because there's certain aspects of Mormonism that people tend to be uncomfortable with, that they get a lot of pushback from members who don't understand them. I'm talking about things like the temple ceremony, which scholars recently have connected to Joseph's experience in Freemasonry, which was a very key part of the transmission of Western esoteric knowledge, by the way, but also the Book of Abraham. There are people out there today who say, oh, the Book of Abraham should be taken out of the canon, the LDS canon. The Book of Abraham is embarrassing because Joseph Smith obviously wasn't translating Egyptian and didn't know how to do so. Joseph Smith did not know how to translate Egyptian. I mean, there's some people, there are people who would argue that he did. I'm not one of them, but there are people who actually argue that, maybe the Book of Abraham was in a lost scroll that, burned in the Chicago fire, or, something else happened to it. And if we could but find that thing, if it wasn't actually destroyed but just lost, we would see the actual Book of Abraham sitting there right before us. And they'll make some, plausible sounding arguments about how, the material in the Book of Abraham fits medieval or Arabic legends of Abraham, or things that possibly go back to antiquity, when I think one of the most obvious tie-ins with antiquity that we see in the Book of Abraham is its connection to Josephus, who was perhaps the second most popular book. His writings were the second most popular writings in colonial America after the Holy Bible. So that would be an obvious source of possible influence on Joseph Smith's Book of Abraham. But I think what makes the Book of Abraham especially grating on people is the existence of these facsimiles that look like altered pieces of Egyptian papyrus with their hieroglyphics kind of mangled and refashioned. In a sense, they're kind of embarrassing. And, we know Professor Nibley worked on them for a long time. A number of other scholars and apologists have gone down the road of studying the Book of Abraham. Some of them, in the process, have lost their faith. Some of them, like John Gee, sort of doggedly stick with it and continue to try to find a way, or maybe skirt finding a way to make some sense out of this Book of Abraham business. Well, I don't really think the Book of Abraham is very mysterious at all. The Book of Abraham, Joseph Smith's Book of Abraham, is scripture written by Joseph Smith that's engaging with the Western esoteric tradition. Because in the Western esoteric tradition, Egypt was the font of all mysteries. If you wanted to know the mysteries, you started with Egypt. And no less a writer than the very first historian in the entirety of Western civilization, Herodotus, said as much. And Herodotus even traced the most mysterious aspects of Greek religion to Egyptian influence. Well, he was the first in a long line of writers and thinkers who felt the same way about Egypt. They felt that Egypt had mysterious, great knowledge, that their history went back so much further than the rest of us, so that if you really wanted to dig into divine things, mysteries, then you had to go to Egypt. You had to look at Egyptian things. But Joseph Smith's belief in this, I think, is well attested by the fact that the Book of Mormon was allegedly written in Reformed Egyptian, and that as soon as he laid eyes on the papyri and mummies that were being sold in Kirtland to the saints, he felt like he really had to get them, because he assumed right away that these writings and these mummies contained key mysteries. And if you look at the writings that spring from his encounter with the mummies and the papyri, you can see that, yes, indeed, right away, he felt like mysteries were contained here, and he was going to get to the bottom of these things as the prophet and a translator, one who had already translated Reformed Egyptian. For centuries, Europeans of an esoteric bent had been trying to decipher these hieroglyphics that had been really a mystery, a stubborn mystery, and lost knowledge for centuries. That, already in the time of the, high to late Roman Empire, that the knowledge of hieroglyphics had essentially started to disappear. You can tell this by reading the writings of Clement of Alexandria, the early church father. And already in his day, he's engaging in speculation about the meaning of these writings. Well, there's another key example, is Clement of Alexandria. You've got Josephus, you've got Clement of Alexandria, one of the greatest of the early church fathers. You have these people engaging with Egypt, the memory of Egypt, how it's significant in the religious history of the world. And Joseph Smith comes along, and he's one of those people who's engaging with that mystery. And all along the way, people are producing religious culture and spiritually inspired by the things that they're finding in their investigation of ancient Egypt. Do we have to exclude Joseph Smith from this bunch? Do we have to be embarrassed that Joseph Smith was one of this bunch? I know that people are, but I don't think that it's necessary to be embarrassed by this. Yes, the results weren't scientific Egyptology. They're not good history. They don't really reveal ancient history of Egypt by and large. Sure, you can make some indirect connections, but as Egyptology has developed, these kinds of more esoteric and spiritual engagements with the Egyptian past that were part of the Western tradition became increasingly embarrassing. Now, Joseph Smith translated these things when, the Book of Abraham papyri, the Joseph Smith papyri, when Egyptian had just barely been translated for the first time. So I don't know that he can be faulted necessarily for being on the wrong side of that discovery, so to speak, but I don't think he's necessarily wrong to have engaged with the Book of Abraham for spiritual inspiration. The Book of Abraham as it is today is a document of that engagement, and though people may be embarrassed by it, I think it would be much better to learn about this past of Western civilization, of Western esotericism, and to own it, because it is simply part of the Western spiritual tradition, it's part of the Western esoteric tradition, and it's clearly all throughout Mormonism. Without the Western fascination with a mysterious ancient Egypt, I would argue that Mormonism would not exist. So if you take all of that out of Mormonism, what you're left with, I would argue, is not Mormonism. Anyway, that's enough of my rant for today. Thanks for hanging out with me. Thanks for geeking out with me. I hope I didn't get too esoteric in all of this, but thank you for listening. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time where we can drink coffee together and geek out about Mormonism together. Bye.